Hello everyone. Thank you for joining the channel. My name is Whimsy, and this is the Oracle of Whimsy. For those of you who are just tuning in, I'm a tarot card reader, and I use a technique that we call the heart-centered remote technique. And I want to talk a little bit about it because we always are getting new people onto the channel, and it's understandable that people get a little confused. So I'm completely happy going over this again. The technique that we do here and also teach here is a very old technique. It's what we have come to call the heart-centered remote technique. And it is a type of meditation that we do, which is based loosely on some of the meditation techniques that we see in many different traditions. The Tibetan Buddhist tradition, shamanic traditions also use techniques similar to the technique that we use here. It's a 5-step meditation technique where we attempt to put ourselves in a relaxed state, put our own ego bias aside, and with an open heart, to the best of our ability, we try to put ourselves in the shoes of the other and attempt to see the world the way the other person sees the world. And often these are people that we may not personally agree with. And the function of this type of meditation technique, these types of meditation techniques are used in the United Nations as a way of engaging in mediation. Many times there are language barriers, cultural barriers that often will lead to misunderstandings. And so these types of techniques can help with mediation. It has also been used historically during wartime to try and put yourself in the position of an opponent, to try and see the strategies they might be using against you. So here we try to build empathy using the technique so that we can create a bridge of understanding between people that may not necessarily agree on certain things. I had a comment a couple days ago. Somebody was upset about some of the things I had said about Mike Pence, and then they had unsubscribed because of it, because they were not a fan of Mike Pence. I had a couple people give feedback like that. So I should clarify that when I was looking at the Mike Pence information, the meditation technique, the remote viewing technique I had done was attempting to put myself in the shoes of a GOP strategist going forward in the coming weeks and months. And so during the experiment, the remote viewing experiment, I attempted to put myself in the shoes of what it would be like if I were a Republican strategist 2-3 months from now, as the president's popularity is waning. And in that state, I felt as a Republican strategist that I would want the president to resign so that we could begin to, we meaning the Republican Party, because at that point, you're in the shoes of the other. I know it gets a little confusing, and that's okay if people are confused. As a Republican strategist, sitting in that state, I found myself wanting to pressure President Trump to resign so that I could help Pence maintain or serve out the term and then potentially be reelected. So does that mean that that's going to happen? Is that going to be the next move of the Republican strategist as the president's popularity declines, which I suspect it will over the coming weeks? We will wait and see. But when I attempted to put myself in their shoes, that was where my mind went. So I just wanted to clarify that that's what's going on when I'm doing a heart-centered remote. I'm not seeing things from Whimsy's perspective or Whimsy's biases, or I'm certainly trying to get out of my own biases, my own opinions, and I'm not hired as a remote viewer to give my opinion. I'm hired as a remote viewer to get out of my own way and to the best of my ability, really be in the shoes of the other person so that there can be some understanding there and hopefully empathy, particularly in cases of disagreements. So that's the first thing I wanted to clarify again for people that are a little confused about the technique. If you'd like to learn more about the technique, we do have it on our playlist. It's a 5-step technique, and I'm also happy to answer people's questions who are trying to be heart-centered remote viewers professionally. The second comment I had was about being empathetic versus being an empath. Somebody had written and said, you know, Whimsy, there's nothing special about you. We're all empaths. I think everybody's a unique snowflake. I do. I think we're all unique. I think I absolutely agree that it's important to be humble when you do this work and to not get into the ego about it, because that's going to actually potentially harm you, and it's going to harm your work. Because to do this work effectively, you have to be able to put your ego aside. And I can tell you, as an Aries, I got plenty of ego, so it is my burden. I acknowledge it, and it's something that I have to be consciously aware of, is to not have ego about this type of work. However, I think there's a little bit of a confusion between what it is to be empathetic versus what it is to be an actual empath. The two words sound the same, but they're not exactly the same thing. I agree that the true nature of human beings is to be empathetic, and the true nature of human beings is to be loving and compassionate. Things happen either through trauma, maybe there's something organic going on, head injury, a lesion, there might be a genetic component, but that abnormal psychology. But in the healthy state, human beings are incredibly empathetic. However, for people who find themselves historically, going back thousands of years, I started off as an anthropologist before I went to med school, and one of the things we find when we look at people doing this type of work, shamans, whether it's the remote viewing studies that come out of Israel, Russia, China, or the United States, the people who become professional empaths seem to all have a couple of things in common. One of the things we know, we also know this from the MK Ultra experiments that were done here in the United States when they were trying to see if they could produce certain types of people. Similar studies out of Russia and China, they worked with orphan populations. We see a lot of the times in people that get into professional empathy, they seem to all share something in common, which is that the individual will go through extreme trauma at a very early age, usually before the age of 7 or 8. This is why children that were in the system, foster kids, sexually abused children, children that suffer from some type of disassociation, seems to be a common theme we find with empaths. And that is because part of the skill of being a professional empath is the ability to completely disassociate. And trauma, usually early trauma, can cause a child to disassociate. In extreme cases of disassociation, you would have dissociative identity disorder, where the child may have multiple personalities. In a case of a professional empath, we have one personality, whether you like it or not. But we do retain this ability to completely disassociate and to observe things from a distance. It's a type of shattering of the ego that empaths experience. Again, some would say before the age of 7, but I've also heard before the age of 10. And this was why the populations that were studied for these types of skills were often orphans. There have also been some horror stories about inducing trauma. in order to enhance these abilities. Margaret Atwood wrote about that in the book The Blind Assassins, where children were blinded. It was based on actual real abuse that took place in certain cultures, where they would blind children, orphans, and abuse them in order to evoke to produce an empath and a psychic. In the shamanic traditions, we also see this, and we also see that third gender persons are often, we find quite a bit of third gender people who've been severely traumatized often become the shamans or the seers in a particular community. Older persons also tend, as we become older, we tend to be able to disassociate more successfully. This is one of the reasons why in the Jewish tradition people may start studying Kabbalah usually after the age of 40. And this is also why as we get older we tend to want to meditate more, reserve our energy more. And I believe that's one of the reasons why we associate magic with being older or the crone, because you're slowly learning to spend less time in this world and beginning to spend more time in, theoretically, other worlds or other states of being. So I just wanted to clarify that because of the confusion between being an empath versus being empathetic. I also want to say that I've seen amazing empaths who did not experience extreme trauma in childhood. So if you had a great and happy childhood, it doesn't mean you can't be an empath. And I've read some interesting studies that you can still be an empath, but they have to work a little harder at it because of this constant theme we see where usually some trauma or series of traumas takes place early in childhood that leads to a shattering of the ego. And that seems to be something that can later be advantageous to doing this type of work, particularly for people who are in the shamanic tradition who are doing soul retrieval. Because literally an aspect of the soul or self is put aside and then is retrieved. With a professional empath, they're learning to use this skill to get out of themselves, to disassociate and observe, and by permission. The difference is that a professional empath gives permission for this other identity or this other self or personality or energy, or call it what you will, to take over so that the empath can from a distance observe and report. But a professional empath always has control over the situation. That's very different than somebody who's an empath and is absorbing and has hypersensitivity due to trauma, a lot of energy in a room, and so for that reason, an empath may not necessarily feel comfortable going to parties, being around loud music, etc. Because in order to survive in early childhood, empaths had to be hypersensitive, particularly if they lived with a predator or where they grew up not feeling safe. Children who go into hiding from domestic violence, for example, which was my own personal experience. We had to go into hiding for a couple of years. That really is the training ground for being a professional empath, in the sense that this type of hypersensitivity of and risk of assault or predation forced the child to be sensitive in ways that may be beyond what is normally expected if one had a safe childhood. And so again, it explains why children in the system, orphans, etc., have been used traditionally for this type of work. So I just wanted to put that out because I had some great questions, and so I wanted to answer them. And again, I hope this clarifies. It does not offend me at all if you have these questions. I think it's good that we keep talking about it, and I would love also for other people who are either professional empaths or who are empaths learning to be professional empaths, if you want to share your stories. If you had a happy childhood and you're an empath, I would love to hear from you as well, because I think it's cool to see how people that it could be that they just naturally had an empathic nature, and that's also pretty interesting. All right, so I now wanted to, and I apologize for the angle, but I really did a number on my back a couple days ago meditating, so I won't be able to show you I won't be able to show the actual layouts today, but I wanted to do just one quick throw about what the week of the impeachment hearings is going to be like, because I know people are asking. And I also wanted to do a quick throw on NATO, because we haven't looked at NATO for a while. All right, so we'll do a simple prayer, as is our way, and we will go in and we will take a look. All right, I want to call on white light protection for myself and my viewers as we ask permission from Spirit to access the Akashic records. We call on our spirit guides and good angels to be with us. Give us the clarity and the wisdom needed to empower us to make the best decisions for ourselves, our families, for the planet, for the people we love, and for those we have strife with. And with that, I say amen. Gotta add that in. All right, so I just want to look at how the week is going to go. I had a dream last night with Donald Trump in it, which was really pretty cool. And I'll talk about that as well after I finish this shuffle. I bought a new deck of cards from Edge of the Circle Books in Seattle, Washington, which is the bookstore that I worked for 5.5 years as a reader while I was in med school and when I was pre-med at UW. And it was just so fun to see all the old gang again. I had a lot of fun. A lot of empaths also will go into healthcare. I've noticed a lot of empaths are nurses. A lot of empaths are healthcare providers, social workers, psychologists, therapists, doctors, etc. That's kind of cool. All right, so last night I had a dream with Donald Trump, and some parts of the dream are hard for me to remember, but basically the main takeaway I got was that loyal members of, there are people within the White House I saw that were going to start to turn on the president. That was one aspect of the dream I saw. More people bailing, particularly women in the White House. That was something I saw. But then I had a very strange dream, and in the dream I was talking to Donald Trump, and he was very sad and very dejected, and he was talking about how he was just going to give up. He didn't feel well, he was tired, he was exhausted, he couldn't do another run for the presidency and deal with the impeachment. He was just physically exhausted. And as I was talking to him, I noticed that there were all these tokens or tchotchkes, things that were sitting on his desk, like little tiny, I don't know how you would describe it, tchotchkes, like little tiny things, little tiny gold coins and things of this nature. So, and I asked him about them, and in the dream he said, oh, whatever, take them if you want them. Like, it doesn't mean anything anymore. And so I took all these coins and little awards and things, some of which were like made of pure gold, and I took them and I said, well, he doesn't need them, he's a billionaire, and I put them in my pocket. And in the next part of the dream, I was in another room. It was like a convention room where people were sitting around, and either the convention had ended or was just about to start. And I started to talk to a friend of mine, and I said, hey, look, Donald Trump gave me all these things, these cool little awards and little gold trinkets and whatnot. And he said, wow, that's really cool. I said, yeah, do you want to meet Donald Trump? He's right over there. He's sitting in that chair over there. And so my friend and I go over and we say, hey, Mr. Trump, nice to see you. And I was talking to my friend about the toys you gave, the things you gave me. And he said, yeah, I'm, and he was talking about that he was going to resign and none of it mattered anymore. And I pulled out one of the trinkets and it said #1, NBC. And I said, but look, you had this one. This is from NBC. Your show was #1 3 years in a row. That means something, doesn't it? And he said, yeah, can I actually have that back? I said, of course you can. And I gave it back to him because in my mind I was thinking, yeah, but the real gold is in my pocket. What I really have is in my pocket and it's pretty valuable. So yeah, I'll give you this, but I better get out of here before he's reminded that he gave me some really expensive stuff and, I better get out of here. How I interpreted the dream, now that I'm looking, thinking about it, is it was a feeling around his energy that he had given up, that he was being wistful about the past, and it was weird. It was like he gave more power to having a hit TV show than being the president. It was a very strange dream, but it was also a feeling of being reconciled to the fact that this was coming to an end. That would be the best way for me to describe the dream. All right, I want to go in now and look at the cards. What's going on with the impeachment hearing this week? We have fleeing. A thief tries to get away with something, which is the thief's card is the base. And then the Ace of Cups is moving through, which is a wedding or a birth, something coming in that is an offer of some type. I've used this card in the impeachment hearings to symbolize the Constitution. It's the Hierophant, or the thing that collectively brings us together as a country. The best way for me to interpret the base cards is that someone is attempting to get away with something and then some offer is made. Regarding the Constitution, there's a negotiation happening. So, in plainer words, I would interpret this that within the framing of the Constitution, there is some wiggle room. There seems to be some wiggle room. In the 4th house, we have the Hangman, which is the energy moving in due to a judgment. So some judgment is going to cause something to be hung up or let go of, and an attempt at fleeing or getting away from something. The Strength card in the back, and then Knight of Wands is in the 6th house. And I'm seeing Devin Nunes. Nunes, is that how you say it? I'm seeing Devin Nunes, and I think Giuliani is coming back as well. But I think Nunes is in trouble. The Power card, Magician card coming in. An offer is rejected. And then the 10 of Cups. 8th house, again, this is Trump's card, I think. Queen of Swords is the ability to let things go or to put the past behind them. It's also a strong card, the strong female who can also often be, it has military boundaries associated with it, but not quite in the same way as the Queen of Wands. The final outcome was the 10 of Cups. I think we're going to see Nunes again this week. His energy comes in strong. I think he's going to be desperate to try and clean up the mess with his reputation right now because of the phone records. I don't know if he's going to be able to get out of it because of how these cards are looking. And it looks like additional evidence is going to be presented in the house with it's going to start getting very, very intellectual. You can see a 5 of Wands in the 7th house, which I read as exchange of ideas, education, etc. And in the 8th house moving forward is a Page of Pentacles, which can be evidence presented, hopes and fears. And you can see here scholarship card, and then weighing the evidence, the 2 of Pentacles. What I like about the energy moving in this week is that it's very academic on both sides, and people weighing the evidence. I think we're going to also see the potential for information. the information coming out that's going to expose certain things, but the fact that there is an Ace of Cups there with the Seven of Swords would lead me to suspect that the Republicans are going to attempt to negotiate a situation with the president that, despite the fact that he'll be found guilty, because of the nature of these cards, they may still be able to get him out of potential prosecution. That would be the best way for me to interpret these cards. I want to do a quick throw on NATO before we finish today. Just see what's going on with NATO. I know that the president and NATO leaders had a little bit of a tiff. So I just want to check on that. What is going on with NATO? Star card coming in and Empress. So I would say that NATO is back in power. Like there's a feeling that they're coming back into power. Star and Empress would suggest that they're getting help. There was some confusion, gaslighting perhaps, or a feeling like they were a little bit in crisis with a Moon card, but it's crossing a Knight of Cups. This leads me to suspect that they're going to be getting help, that NATO is going to come together, and everybody who is part of NATO is going to be working together, and some kind of they're coming together. The best way to describe this is that every country that's part of NATO, including those that have been attacked by Russia, will be coming together as a unified force. That's the best way for me to describe this. You have a Tower card in the 4th house over NATO, which means like an explosion or some attack or some threat. But what I like about these cards is that NATO's on the same page. You can see an Ace of Swords in their 4th house, which is victory. This is a feeling like we are all united against the common enemy. 7 of Wands in the past placement would suggest that they were on the defensive before, but they're moving into an Ace of Pentacles with the Tower card, which means that I don't think they showed their hand. I don't think that Putin and I think that NATO was underestimated, and I think that what we're going to be seeing with a Star and an Empress card, which is abundance, it's the treasure trove with an Ace of Pentacles coming out, would suggest that it goes back to the remote we did about the British intelligence agency saying that you're going to know everything we know in a very short amount of time. Something is going to come out, and we are going to see just how powerful NATO is in the coming months. And we're going to see NATO become increasingly unified. Where they are right now is still some confusion with a 7 of Cups, but you can see again here in the 8th house, the Sun card, which would denote some kind of information coming out, the hopes and fears that NATO will break apart or that people will leave. But you have a nice 4 of Wands as the outcome, which I read as the 4th month, possibly April time. And then it's clarified by the Exile card, to return back from exile. I read it as leaving things or people or situations that place us in exile. It's interesting is that in the 7th house, we have the Master's card, the 8 of Pentacles. People coming forward, exposing things in the 8th house, the hopes and fears, smoother waters, and then the final outcome clarified with the 5 of Pentacles. Leads me to suspect that this could drag on into potentially April, which I'm really hoping it won't, but it could potentially drag into April. But by April, we really see the UN coming together against a common threat. And because the final outcome was the 5 of Pentacles, I would also suspect that people are moving away from the threat or the thing that places us in exile or threatens us towards unity. But it could go on until April, unfortunately, with these cards. All right, thanks for watching, everybody, and thank you for letting me, yet again, explain what I do. It's completely okay. I understand people get confused. If you'd like to find out more about my work, you can go to tarotwithwhimsy.com, and I'm available for phone readings and in person if you're in the Los Angeles area. And I will leave my information below. Take care, everyone. Be well, and thanks for the support. Bye.